It all started with the black book behind the chimney, the place where Henry used to keep his rusted tools and squirrel traps, where dust had laid undisturbed for decades. And yet, there it was, wrapped in a dry canvas cloth, tied with fishing line, resting behind a loose brick as if it had been placed there for someone to find only after he was gone. 3 days had passed since the funeral. The house was too quiet now, the creaking of floorboards and the ticking of the kitchen clock louder than they'd ever been. Maybelle Hutchins, 78, had buried her husband on a Friday afternoon in the shallow heat of late October, beneath the shade of the same pecan tree where they'd first slow danced barefoot during a thunderstorm in 1962. Henry was gone, and she had promised herself, after the last casserole was dropped off and the last distant cousin drove back to Baton Rouge, that she would begin sorting his things. Slowly, with respect, and with her hands, not with her heart. That's how she found the ledger. It wasn't a journal, not really. The pages were thick, yellowed, and ruled with columns, like it had once belonged to a church accountant or a county clerk. The handwriting wasn't Henry's, but older, rougher, dipped in ink. The first few pages were dull, dates, numbers, names. Baptisms maybe, or donations. But then she flipped to a page marked Spring 1911 Transfers. And everything changed. There were names. Dozens of them. Each written carefully on a line of its own. Beside each name, an age, a date, a destination, sometimes a town, sometimes just initials, and a fee. Some names were marked with small red stars. Others were crossed out entirely. But 3 names, 3, were underlined in Henry's handwriting. She knew that script like the lines of her own palm. Carla May, age 5. Jeremiah W., age 6. Emily, age 3. No surnames. No parents. No explanations. The silence in the room deepened. Even the clock seemed to hesitate. She read the page again. And again. The name Emily stuck like a splinter. It was the same name Henry had once whispered in his sleep when they were newly married. Maybelle remembered asking him, and he'd said it was a cousin's child, lost long ago. She hadn't pressed. Now she wished she had. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in Henry's armchair with the book on her lap and a shawl wrapped tight over her shoulders. Max, their old, limping coonhound, lay beside her feet, ears twitching in the dark. The only sound was the slow hum of the fan and the memory of crickets outside. In the back of the ledger, in a fold of the canvas wrap, she found a photograph. For children in ill-fitting clothes, standing in front of what looked like a rail car. Their eyes wide and unsmiling. A cardboard sign hanging on a nail beside the train door read, Orphan Train Stop, Opelousas 1911. Maybelle's chest tightened. She had heard of them, of course. The orphan trains, they ran from 1854 to 1929, moving abandoned or homeless children from crowded cities in the north and east to farmlands and rural towns in the south and Midwest. It was said to be a Christian mercy, a chance at family. But she also knew the stories. Children treated like laborers, split from siblings, some simply disappearing. She stared at the photo again. The third child, a little girl with about too big for her head, looked familiar. Not in detail, but in expression. Something about the way her mouth turned down slightly at the corners. It was the same expression Henry wore when he was deep in thought, when he was remembering something he would never speak of. Maybelle folded the photograph, slid it into her apron pocket, and stood slowly. Her knees ached. Her back hurt. But her mind was clear in a way it hadn't been in years. There was a reason Henry had kept this ledger hidden all his life. And there was a reason his handwriting was on that page. She couldn't ask him now, but she could still follow where the names led. Opelousas looked the same as it had in the 60s, when she and Henry would drive up on Sundays for mass and fried catfish. The streets were wide and cracked, the storefronts peeling, the air thick with the scent of magnolia and hot pavement. But the courthouse still stood, and so did the church. Maybelle parked outside the St. Landry Parish Records office just after noon, the black ledger wrapped in a canvas grocery bag. She hadn't told Ellie, her daughter, where she was going. What would she say? I'm chasing ghosts your father left me in a notebook? No. This was something she had to do alone. Inside, the air was cold, humming with old lights and quiet questions. A young clerk at the desk, maybe 22, kind eyes, nervous fingers, tried to help. I'm looking for records from 1911, Maybelle said softly. Children. Transfers. From a train stop in town. The orphan trains. The girl blinked, unsure. That's pretty far back. Maybelle set the ledger on the counter. The girl hesitated. then opened it. Her eyes widened. "I've never seen anything like this," she whispered. 20 minutes later, she returned with a box labeled St. Landry/Charity Homes/1909 to 1913. Inside were faded index cards and a stack of brittle folders. And one file in particular, marked Children from New York/ARR. April 1911 matched 3 of the names from Henry's ledger. Emily, Carla May, Jeremiah W. But the file was nearly empty. Only one page remained, a typed roster from the Children's Aid Society, listing the children who arrived by train on April 9, 1911. No mention of where they went. No record of who took them. Most of the placement records were lost in a fire in 1944, the girl said quietly. The church basement flooded. Maybelle nodded slowly. Of course. But something strange caught her eye. On the back of the page, in pencil, someone had written, Lee, C, not girl. Sent with preacher. Check Brown ledger. She stared at the name. Lee, C. She had assumed Emily was a girl. But what if Lee was a surname? And C was a boy? The ink on Henry's ledger had said, Emily, 3, but what if the note was mistaken or rewritten? Her hands tightened around the page. The preacher, who was he? A nickname? A real minister? And what was the Brown ledger? The young clerk shook her head. We don't have anything like that on file. Maybelle stood there for a long moment, then gently folded the copy of the note and placed it beside the photo from the chimney. Out on the sidewalk, the heat had deepened. A storm was brewing. The clouds above Opelousas were gray and slow-moving, curling like smoke. She didn't know where to go next. But then she remembered something. A building on the outskirts of town, long closed, an old orphan home that had served both black and white children during Reconstruction, long before records were standardized. People whispered about it still. The Carver place. It had burned once, been rebuilt, then shut down completely in 1920. Some said the children who stayed too long there stopped speaking. She drove out toward the edge of the cane fields, the road narrowing, the trees closing in. The house stood like a skeleton in the marshlight, 2 stories, sagging, windows broken, vines pulling down what time had not yet stolen. She parked. Max barked once from the passenger seat, then fell silent. Maybelle stepped out, the ledger under her arm. The front door creaked open at her touch. Inside, the air was thick with dust and old wood and something else, a feeling. Like being watched. Or expected. On the floor of the old entryway lay a book. Not burned. Not buried. Just waiting. Its spine was brown. The brown ledger was heavier than she expected. Damp along the edges, swollen from years of moisture and heat. Its cover bore no title, no initials, just cracked leather, warped like skin stretched too long in silence. Maybelle sat on a fallen beam inside what had once been the Carver House dining hall. Above her, the beam sagged, dust drifted like ash through angled sunbeams. Max lay at the threshold, ears twitching, nose low to the ground, as if unsure whether they were guests or trespassers. She opened the book slowly. The pages inside were dense with handwriting, not numbers, not inventory, but notes. Personal, frantic, and dated week by week through 1911 and 1912. April 14th, 1911. Preacher Wilkes arrived with 3 new children. One silent, one coughing blood, the other with strange eyes. I do not trust him. He says they're special, but gives no papers. May 2nd, 1911. Jeremiah W. ran into the marsh again. Says someone is calling him from the cane rows. The other children are afraid. Carla May won't speak at all now. Emma, still missing. Maybelle felt her hands grow cold. Emma, still missing. The next few pages blurred together, frantic handwriting, scratched outlines, names repeated over and over. Some underlined, some circled. But one entry stopped her breath. June 19th, 1911. H. Hutchins came today. Took Jeremiah without question. Paid in full. Wouldn't look me in the eye. Wilkes said not to ask. Her throat tightened. H. Hutchins. Henry's grandfather? Or Henry himself, if the date was wrong? But in 1911, Henry would have been a child. That meant this ledger came from the generation before. The name was a family name. She turned the page. Taped inside, yellow with age, was a sketch. A symbol, drawn in ink. An open eye inside a sunburst, surrounded by 7 small dots. And beneath it, marked children were sent to the Hollow. God forgive us. Wilkes kept the list. The Hollow. The name was unfamiliar, but it sent a chill into her spine. Maybelle stood, slowly, the brown ledger clutched tight in her hand. She left the carver place in silence. She didn't look back. That evening, in the motel just outside Opelousas, she spread both ledgers out across the small table. The black one, Henry's. The brown one, Carver's. Different voices. Same names. And then she saw it. On the very last page of Henry's ledger, scribbled faintly in pencil, sideways along the margin, a single sentence. If she finds this, tell her I didn't know. Not then. I only followed the name. I thought it was my own. She stared at the words. He thought it was his own. Emily. He must have believed that child, the missing girl, was family. But why? Unless. She remembered something Henry had said once, years ago, after a funeral. Names don't always stay where they started. She hadn't understood it then. But now, sitting in the dim motel room with 2 ledgers, a photo, and a past too heavy to carry alone, she wondered. What if Henry had been one of them? What if he wasn't the one collecting children? What if he was the one taken? She had to ask twice at the gas station, and once more at a bait shop off Highway 190, before anyone would even admit they knew what the hollow was. The third man, older than her, skin leathered from sun and decades of work, didn't speak at first. He just looked at her long and slow, like someone sizing up a storm that had no business returning. You don't want to go down there, he finally said, his voice dry as pine bark. Ain't nothing but ghosts and people too stubborn to leave. I think someone I loved came from there, Maybelle replied. That changed something in his face. Not sympathy. Recognition. He pointed. You'll hit a split in the road past the old sawmill. Don't take the gravel. Stay on the grass. Drive slow. If you hear dogs, keep going. If you don't, turn around. She nodded. Didn't ask what that meant. The hollow wasn't marked on any sign, but she felt when she entered it. The trees grew closer. The air thickened. The world dimmed slightly, not like sunset, more like memory. Houses stood with leaning porches and curtainless windows. Cars rusted into the mud, buried half to their windows. A mailbox read, Felder, its flag broken off. And then she saw the church. Or what was left of it. Whiteboards stripped of paint. A bell tower half fallen. But the door stood open, swaying gently in the breeze like an invitation written in grief. Max stayed in the truck, whining low. She took only the brown ledger in her hand and stepped inside. The pews were gone. The pulpit, too. But the back wall bore something stranger than rot or scripture. It was the symbol. The eye in the sunburst, drawn in coal or ash across the wallboards, faded by time but still watching. And below it, words etched into the wood with a knife. He sees the marked, but he forgets the quiet. There was someone still here. She heard the sound before she saw him, a low shuffling behind a doorway, a cough like drywood splitting. Hello, she called. A figure stepped out from the shadows. Thin, old, wrapped in denim and wool, with skin like smoke-cured oak and eyes too steady for madness. You brought it back, he said, his voice cracked with time. I brought the book, she answered. The brown ledger. And questions. He walked slowly, as if every step had to negotiate with pain. Sat down on a half-crushed crate. I kept it because no one else would. Wilkes burned the others. Wilkes, she said, the preacher. He nodded. He called them God's harvest. Said children without papers were angels in waiting. But he kept his own list. Special names. Marked ones. Kids who saw things. Heard things. Or had memories they shouldn't. She pulled the page with Jeremiah's name. This one, she said. Taken by a Hutchins. Could it be? He looked up sharply. Henry. She nodded. His jaw clenched. I remember him. Quiet boy. Sharp eyes. Cried without sound. The kind that remembers more than he should. He was my husband, she whispered. He never told me. No one from the hollow ever does, the man replied. We learn early. What's buried stays buried. But sometimes it grows anyway. She sat beside him on the crate, the ledger open between them. Did he take Jeremiah? She asked. The man shook his head. He was Jeremiah. The world tilted. What? He wasn't taken. He was left. Wilkes gave him a new name. Changed his age. Moved him between homes like cattle. By the time he came here, he'd had 3 birthdays and 2 last names. But I never forgot his eyes. You don't forget a child like that. She covered her mouth. The man looked at her gently. He tried to trace it back. Later. That ledger of his. I bet he was chasing shadows. Trying to put a shape to what no one ever gave him. Maybelle stared at the brown pages in her lap. All those names. All those lines. And her Henry. Jeremiah W. A boy without a family. A boy turned man who carried silence like a second spine. I thought I knew him, she said quietly. You did, the man said. You knew the part he made real. Outside, the wind shifted. The trees swayed in slow rhythm. Did he ever find them? She asked. The others. The man didn't answer. He only pointed to a trapdoor at the base of the pulpit. She opened it. Wood groaned. Inside, in the darkness below the floor, lay a small wooden box wrapped in canvas and twine, just like the ledger had been. The box was small. No bigger than a shoebox, bound tightly with twine that crumbled in her hands. The canvas was stiff and dusty, and smelled faintly of cedar and salt, like something pulled from beneath the floorboards of time itself. Maybelle set it gently on the church step, light filtering through the open door, Max watching from the grass below like a sentinel carved from patience. Inside the box were 3 things. The first was a folded list, written in pencil, brittle paper, names in neat rows. Beside each name was a single word. Found. Lost. Moved. Gone. Some names had both. Found, then lost again. At the top, it read, Children from Wilkes Circle, started 1911. Finished. Near the bottom, her heart snagged on a line. Carla May, alive, Oklahoma 1959. Emily, never confirmed. Jeremiah W., me. The second item was a photo. Faded. Blurry. 3 children, a boy and 2 girls, standing in front of a rail car. Same one as in the original photo she'd found in Henry's ledger. But this one had something new. In the boy's hand was a folded paper. Enlarged, it was hard to read. But Maybelle could make out the symbol, the eye in the sunburst, drawn in black ink. Beneath it, someone had scrawled with shaking hand. He marked us, but we chose each other. And behind them, in the shadow of the train's door, a man in preacher's robes. Face turned from the camera. Maybelle studied the boy's eyes. It was Henry. Younger. Barely 6. But unmistakable. The set of his mouth. The hands curled at his sides, like he never quite knew what to do with them. She laid the photo beside the list, heart heavy, throat aching. Then she found the third item. A letter. In Henry's handwriting. Folded once, tucked into an envelope that had never been sealed. On the front, in fading blue ink. For M, if I ever find the courage. Her breath caught. She opened it. May. If you're reading this, it means I never told you. Or I couldn't. I'm sorry for that. You always knew there were parts of me I didn't let you touch, and I tried to pretend it was just the war, or the years, or bad knees. But the truth is, my name never belonged to me. It was given. Stitched together from silence. I came from a place called the Hollow, but I was made from absence. I don't remember my parents. Just the eyes of a man who told me God had a better use for me. I didn't understand then. I do now. I spent years tracing names, not because I wanted to find them, but because I needed to know if any of us made it out whole. If we became more than what he tried to make us. Carla was strong. Emma disappeared before the first winter. I was always the quiet one. Maybe that's why I survived. But I always carried you, May. You were the one thing I chose, not inherited. You were mine, fully, freely. And that makes you the only real thing I ever had. If you find this, don't chase the rest. Let them sleep. Just know, I loved you not with parts, but with everything I had left. H. The letter trembled in her hands. She didn't cry. Not yet. She sat on the church step for a long time, holding the letter like it was the last warm thing left in the world. The wind moved through the trees with slow reverence. Max laid his head on her knee. Then, carefully, she refolded the paper and placed it back into its envelope. She had what she came for. But she wasn't done, because one name had no answer. Emily. Never confirmed. And if Henry spent his life wondering, then she owed it to him to find the ending. The next morning, Maybelle drove north. She didn't know the exact destination, only a whisper between the lines of Henry's note and the bottom of the box, a faded train ticket stub wrapped in oilcloth, with just 2 words still legible. Jonesboro, Arkansas. And a date, August 1911. It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing. She called Ellie from the road, not to explain, but to say she might be gone a while longer. Her daughter sounded concerned, but didn't press. She trusted Maybelle's silences now, the same way Maybelle had learned to trust Henry's. 6 hours later, she crossed into Arkansas, the trees thickening into pine and ash, the towns getting smaller. Jonesboro was quiet, older than she remembered, full of red brick buildings and slow-moving people. She went straight to the local historical society. The woman at the desk was in her 80s, with bright eyes and a sharp tongue. When Maybelle mentioned the orphan trains and the name Emily, the woman's gaze narrowed with interest. Well, now, she said slowly. That name don't show up much. But I've seen it. You wait here. 20 minutes later, she returned with a thin file folder wrapped in string. Inside was a single page, yellowed but whole. A placement record. August 1911. The child, Emily Carter, age listed as 4. Placed with a widowed seamstress named Clarabelle Keene. There was a penciled note on the side. Unfit. Child rehomed. Final location unknown. Another vanished thread. But in the bottom of the folder, beneath the paper, was a photograph. A newspaper clipping, actually. Celebration of the Foundlings, 1969, Benton County Orphan Day. In the photo, a row of elderly women and men, seated beneath a banner. And third from the left, a woman with silver hair and an unmistakable face. She wore the same expression Henry had carried all his life, the quiet kind, cautious but not cold. And beneath her image, in printed caption, Mrs. Emily Green, 62, guest of honor. Alive. In 1969. In Benton County. Is she still alive? Maybelle asked, breath caught in her throat. The archivist frowned. She lived in Fayetteville. I think she passed some years ago. But she ran a second-hand bookshop. Might still be there. That evening, Maybelle stood in front of the shop. 7 lanterns used and rare, hand-painted on the glass. The lights inside were off, but in the window sat a small wooden sign. In memory of Emily Green, 1907 to 1994. She gave stories to those who had none. She didn't cry. Not yet. She circled the shop, unsure why, until she saw it. A side alley. A narrow door. And beside it, carved into the wooden frame, barely visible in the twilight. An eye inside a sunburst. Not drawn. Carved. Someone knew she would come. Inside, the small back room had become a sort of shrine. Books, yes, but also letters. Boxes of them. Labeled by first name. And one, in careful penmanship, read. For J.W. Her hand shook as she opened it. Inside was a letter. To the boy I never saw again. They told me you died in the marsh. But I never believed them. I remembered your hand in mine, the way you stood between me and the man with the book. You were braver than I ever learned to be. I searched for years. Then I stopped. But not because I forgot. Because I wanted to remember you as you were, not how they said you'd become. If you're reading this, it means you lived. It means something beautiful made it out of that place. And it means I wasn't wrong to believe in you. You saved me once. That was enough. I hope you had love. I hope you were happy. Yelji. Maybelle stood in the quiet room, letter in hand, the dust pressing against the windows, and something in her chest broke, gently, like wood bending in the wind. She placed Henry's photo next to the letter. She whispered, she remembered you. And for the first time in days, she smiled. The house was just as she'd left it. Pine needles curled along the front steps. The afternoon sun poured in across the wooden floor like warm syrup. Max, tired from the road, settled back into his favorite corner with a soft groan, as if to say, we're home. But Maybelle didn't go to the kitchen, didn't sit in Henry's armchair. Instead, she walked straight to the brick wall behind the chimney, the place where she had found the ledger. This time, she placed something back. Not the ledger. That she would donate, along with copies of everything she'd found, to the historical archive in Opelousas. Let someone else carry that weight. But the letter from Emma to Henry, she wrapped it carefully in oilcloth and laid it inside the hollow. Then, next to it, she placed Henry's own letter to her. Let them speak now, in silence. Let the house hold their story, as it had held their lives. That evening, she sat on the porch, a cup of sweet tea in her hand, the breeze soft across her shoulders. The cicadas had returned. The same slow rhythm of Louisiana summer, unchanging. But inside her, something was no longer stuck. She reached for her phone. Ellie answered on the second ring. Mama, I want to come visit, Maybelle said softly. Maybe tell you some things. There was a pause on the other end, not hesitation, but emotion. We'd love that. A few days later, Maybelle packed a small suitcase. Not for a search, this time, but for something else entirely. Before she left, she stopped by the local library and left an envelope for the reference desk. Inside were copies of 3 documents. The orphan train photo. The list from Wilkes's Circle. A hand-drawn copy of the eye in the sunburst. On the envelope, she wrote, for anyone still asking where they came from. Then she locked the door behind her. The house no longer felt like a riddle. It felt like a story that had been told. And out on the road, as the landscape opened in golden light and the trees bowed gently in the wind, Maybelle smiled. Henry hadn't been a liar. He'd been a survivor. And now, His story, their story, had a final page. Not an ending. A legacy.